In the morning of August 26, 2019, residents of the Sukabumi area were having a quiet morning when they suddenly heard a loud explosion. So a few of the brave residents decided to look where the sound was coming from. Up on a hill, right at the edge of a cliff, a car was engulfed in flames. The strong smell of gasoline was very much present, but some of the residents still tried to extinguish the flames. But of course, it was to no avail. Calling the fire department would be the best choice, but the area that they live in is quite remote. It would take hours for the firefighters to arrive, but to be safe than sorry, they of course called them. They could do nothing but wait for them to come and wait until the flames died down on their own. They weren't too worried as the burning car was quite far away from the residents' homes, but they were concerned about how very suspicious the situation is. They might live in a small town, but they weren't naive. It was pretty obvious the car was deliberately set on fire. So, again, just to be safe, they also decided to call the police. It would take some time for the police to arrive, so the residents started to gather important facts on their own. Apandi, one of the witnesses, saw that there were two cars heading to the area, and he also mentioned that this happened around 11:30 a.m. After the residents/witnesses exchanged several pieces of information, the flames finally died down on some parts of the car. This has given the opportunity for some of the people to peek inside. Once they did, they immediately jumped back, not because of the heat, but because of the two bodies inside the car. They started to panic, telling the growing number of onlookers to move even further away. But all they could do was again wait. Finally, when the police arrived, the residents relayed all the information that they had gathered. The officers immediately knew that foul play was definitely involved. Even though the bodies were partially charred, it could not cover up the smell of decomposition. The police didn't take too long to figure out who the car had belonged to. Fortunately, the perpetrators had been very dumb and had done nothing to obscure the car plate, so the police easily tracked down the owner. The car itself was registered under the name of Henny, so they tracked her down all the way to Jakarta, and they were able to get her statement. It is true that the legal documents of the car were registered under her name. However, she said that her ex-husband actually bought the car for her son, and her son would be the one who would use it the most. She also added that her son doesn't currently live with her, but lived with his father and his stepmom. So she told the investigators to please check up on her ex-husband named Edi Chandra Purnama and her son M. Adi Pradana, as she wasn't able to get a hold of them this past week. I got nightmares in my head. The bodies inside the car were Edi Chandra Purnama, more known as Pupung, and his son M. Adi Pradana, more known as Dana. Pupung was a 50-year-old businessman and Dana was 23 years old. He was Pupung's first and only son from his previous marriage. Dana is known to be a loving boyfriend and overall a very fun person to befriend. Before his passing, he was actually planning to settle down with his then girlfriend. This was known from her Instagram post. She wrote how they first met at a cafe and there was an instant connection between them. She also wrote that Dana was working hard towards his own personal financial stability so that he would have enough to marry her. Dana even gave her a necklace days before his passing at the same cafe where they first met. They had a cute interaction where he surprised her by putting on the necklace for her. This, of course, became a fond memory that she would cherish. And what about his father Pupung? Pupung is known as a successful businessman. He lived in the Lebak Bulus area of South Jakarta, a quite prestigious area in the bustling city of Jakarta. It's close to very popular areas such as Pondok Indah, where billionaires live. Think of it as the Beverly Hills of Jakarta, and for him to own a spacious land where his two-story home is near this area, it's no-brainer that he has money. Literally beside his residence, he also owns a spacious empty lot suitable for businesses. He rents out this empty lot to a good friend who is also a fellow businessman. His friend opened a car wash and detailing shop, which is pretty lucrative in its own right. So Pupung would receive a very generous amount of rent money every year. Therefore, money is pretty much set for him and his family, and it is safe to say that they were very well off. Pupung is also known as someone who was active in many activities and social settings. He was keen on politics and even volunteered for Joko Widodo's second presidential run. He also likes to partake in golf and is proficient in the Indonesian traditional martial arts of pencaksilat. This next one, however, might cause some controversy, but he founded a flat earth believer community alongside his son. I don't share the sentiment, but it doesn't mean that they deserve what has happened to them because of this belief. But I digress. A lot of people, be it his political colleagues or fellow businessmen, said that he would joke around but is quite private when it comes to his personal life. From the outside, Pupung leads what you call a harmonious life. He has 2 wonderful children and leads a blended family with his second marriage to a woman named Aulia Kusuma, whom he has a daughter with. Aulia and Pupung first met from a website called Tagged and started to get close from chatting to finally meeting in person. Aulia herself was once married before and has 2 children herself. At first, Aulia didn't have any attraction nor interest towards Pupung, but feelings started to grow when Aulia broke her arm in an accident. Pupung showed a lot of care to her and even accompanied her to several therapy appointments. They grew even closer once Pupung introduced Dana to Aulia. Aulia mentioned that Dana became attached to her right away, and she thought this is because Dana has no mother figure in his life, which we're going to take a mental note of that. She also mentioned that Dana begged her to marry his dad so that they could be a family together, including with Aulia's own children. Of course, this broke Aulia's heart, and she finally relented and decided to marry Pupung. And all was rainbows and sunshine until it wasn't. At this point, Pupung and Aulia have been married for 9 years when things started to get tense in their household. You see, Aulia was in tremendous debt. She owed multiple banks billions of rupiah, and she has to pay a monthly installment of 200 million a month. Maybe around 13,000 US dollars. The money was supposedly used to open several businesses, but only one was constantly brought up. It was a restaurant, and it was failing miserably. Instead of gaining profit, it was actually taking more and more money out of their personal account. So of course, this led to a lot of arguments between her and Pupung. According to Aulia, these debts are actually not of her own. They are in actuality Pupung's debt. Aulia explained because he has been blacklisted from many banks to ever apply for a loan, they had registered this loan under Aulia's name. So Of course, she's drowning in debt and having a hard time paying the installments, not to mention the constant harassment she received from the bank to pay up. It was stated from several sources that Aulia wasn't currently working, but she did work for a reputable company. However, she quits to become a full-time mom. So she probably relied on Pupung for money through his business ventures. In order to lessen the amount of money that she owed, she would pay the installments by using her credit card, and she even had to pawn her son's paid-off car for the payments, which just puts her in a bigger debt. To resolve this huge burden, she tried to persuade Pupung to sell the house in Lebak Bulus, the one that they are currently living in. And if it were to be sold off, it would definitely cover most of the debt. Then they could just live in the apartment that she already owned before the marriage. However, when this idea was approached to Pupung, he got extremely angry and told her to pay the debt herself. And this part shocked many people. The reason he told her that is because he has no recollection of ever taking any kind of loan under her name. He still wanted to support her, but he also wanted her to take accountability for the failed businesses and for her to learn the hard way on managing the finances. But it was too late. Aulia saw red after that argument. Sick of having to pay for the debt and its soaring interest, she decided to do something diabolical. It all started actually months before the authorities found the burned bodies. You see, Aulia spends a lot of her free time watching soap operas as well as dramas, and by watching them, she was disturbingly inspired by how in some of these dramas they would commit a crime and how easy they would cover it up. So she hatched a plan, but she needs extra help from some people. Pupung and Aulia had home assistants working for them. She recalled a former assistant by the name of Tini, who now lives in Lampung, a city in the island of Sumatra. Aulia thought that she must want to make some extra cash. Tini wasn't the type to be so morally correct anyways, Aulia thought, so she gave her a call. She told Tini if she can find a shaman to send santet. Santet is the Indonesian version of a hex or a curse, basically intended to harm the recipient physically, mentally, and emotionally through a dark ritual. However, Tini said that she doesn't know anyone that could send a hex, but her husband might. She told Aulia that she would call back. She needed to discuss this with her husband named Rodi. After waiting for quite a while, Tini had called back with great news. Well, at least for Aulia. She was told that Rodi apparently knows a shaman that could do so. Of course, this service isn't for free. Rodi asked Aulia to send him 45 million rupiah to pay for the shaman's services. And Aulia didn't blink or flinch at the amount of money. She just agreed and sent them the money right away, which is confusing because she supposedly doesn't have that kind of money. But I guess she had some lying around. Anyways, Tini and Rodi have to report everything that has to do with this hex on demand. And one day they told Aulia that the shaman had succeeded in sending the deadly curse for Pupung. But as we all guessed, nothing had happened to Pupung. He was healthy as a horse. What Aulia didn't know is that Rodi and Tini were basically conning her. There was no shaman, and they just pocketed the 45 million rupiah. Aulia grew extremely frustrated and relayed her feelings to Tini and Rodi, which then Rodi suggested that they should just shoot Pupung point and blank, which Aulia agreed, but she had no idea where to get a hold of a gun. Of course, Rodi suggested that he would get a gun for her, so he told her that he would need another 50 million rupiah, not just for the gun, but also a hitman who would be willing to pull the trigger. At this point, however, Aulia was starting to run low on cash, so she could only fork out 35 million. Rodi insisted that this isn't enough. The reason he insisted for 50 million is, well, he was going to pocket the money. He had no intention of buying a gun and finding a hitman, so Aulia decided to cancel the plan and told Rodi and Tini to wait for further instructions. While thinking of the perfect plan to end her husband's life, she realized something. In the will that her husband had written, the benefactors of his fortune and estate is not only her daughter, but also her stepson. And if Dana were around, he would be opposed to selling the Lebak Bulus house, and he would also be asking questions if his father were to die unexpectedly. Dana would obviously accuse her of harming his father. At this point, Aulia and Dana's relationship wasn't on good terms. They had fought a lot, and Dana would always call Aulia as the homewrecker who ruined his life. So, in Aulia's mind, he would just hinder everything she had meticulously planned. He also had to go, she callously thought. Then it is set. She would have to end the lives of Pupung as well as Dana. After many failed attempts in ending her husband's life, she had an idea that maybe poisoning Pupung and Dana would be the best method. They would be incapacitated, and the chances of them fighting back would be very slim. But the coward that she is, she doesn't want to do it herself. She asked Rodi again to find her 2 hitmen that would be willing to do it. Surprisingly, he did find 2 people from Lampung. They were farmers by the name of Sugeng and Agus. They were actually misled by Rodi. He had told them that his boss, Aulia, needed help to clean and clear out a storage room in her Lebak Bulus home. Rodi knew that if he had told them the truth, they wouldn't be willing to go with him to Jakarta. But when they got to Jakarta, they were told something completely different. They were told that they would be aiding and abetting in the death of Pupung and Dana. And once they succeed, each of them will receive 200 million rupiah. 3 people had actually followed Rodi to Jakarta, but one guy was so spooked with the actual task that he begged Rodi and Aulia to let him go home. Aulia had to relent. Better sending him home than him going to the police. So she gave him some money, not just to go back to Lampung, but also as a bribe so he wouldn't tell anyone of their plans. But what of Sugeng and Agus? Well, they stayed. You would be asking, why couldn't they just say no? Well, one, there's the power dynamic between Aulia and the farmers. Unfortunately, farmers in Indonesia would most of the time have unstable finances. If they own the land, then their income would depend on the season. If they work for the landowner, they would depend on a tight salary. Sometimes instead of a salary, they will actually get produce from the farm. And not to mention, they were brought from Lampung, albeit quite a developed city in the island of Sumatra, but compared to Jakarta, the development is still far in between. So they might lack education, and they are probably quite naive about the situation. Of course, they also might be very much tempted by the amount of money offered. 200 million rupiah still is a lot of money, even if you're not a farmer from Lampung. Friday, on the 23rd of August, Aulia was determined to proceed with her mission. Aulia figured that the best way to maim him was after they tangled in the sheets. Usually they would do the deed in the morning, but Alia offered to do it that night. She made up some excuse that she had a lot of errands to do the next day, so tonight would be best. Pupung agreed and they had the tango in the sheets. After they were done, Pupung asked for his juice. You see, Pupung has this habit of drinking some kind of juice every day, and Alia used this opportunity to basically take his life. She had prepared him a glass of tomato juice with 20 finely ground sleeping pills. But she knew that many sleeping pills would be noticeable by taste. So she told him that the tomato juice was mixed with bitter melon. She told him that it was good for his health and vitality. He agreed to drink it. He was quite fond of anything that could be beneficial for his health and fitness. So she brought him the glass from the kitchen to their master bedroom. At first, Pupung was a bit apprehensive with the dubious addition of bitter melon, but he had no reason to question her, so he drank the tall glass of juice in one go. He hated the taste. It was extremely bitter, retching after finishing the drink, but managed to keep it down. He definitely wasn't a fan and told her to stick to the regular juice. So Aulia took the empty glass from his hand and happily obliged. I wouldn't be making any more juices after this anyway, she thought, while rolling her eyes as she walked back to the kitchen, making sure to close the door behind her to let Pupung sleep. At the same time, in Dana's room, located on the second floor of their home, Dana was distracted by the company of Aulia's nephew. Aulia had invited her nephew named Kelvin. He was tasked to basically entertain Dana while she poisons Pupung. Kelvin, of course, knew what was going on and was on board the moment that money was involved. They actually concocted this plan together. He also cared for his aunt, for he had heard all of her sob stories of how much she was suffering under the mental abuse of Pupung. But how much those sob stories are true, we'll never actually know, because at this point, anything that Aulia says might be a lie. So what did Kelvin have to do? He was told to bring the same batch of spiked juice and a glass of whiskey, which was also mixed with a couple of finely ground sleeping pills. Dana was having a lot of fun. He quite liked Kelvin, and his company was always welcomed. So he had no suspicion when the juice tasted awful and the whiskey was more bitter than usual. He chatted away with Kelvin, sang along to the songs, and finished the whole glass of whiskey, unaware that his father was on the brink of death. Aulia had waited anxiously for the pills to take effect. When they finally did, and Pupung was fast asleep, Aulia instructed the two hitmen to come out of their hiding and enter the master bedroom. Sugeng was quietly instructed to hold down Pupung's stomach, and Agus was instructed to hold down his legs. Then Aulia took a towel and, using all the force that she had, held it down on top of Pupung's face. Pupung didn't immediately retaliate, but once he realized that he had trouble breathing and his body was seemingly restricted, he started scratching and tried wriggling his way out. He even managed to scratch Aulia's arm, but the sleeping pills were making his body heavy and slow, and after a while, he completely stopped. Aulia gave a nod to the other two, indicating that they were done. Now, all they needed to do was wait until Dana was asleep. It took a long time for Dana to be fast asleep. They waited until 4 a.m. Kelvin finally motioned to Aulia and the two hitmen that it was time. It was the same scenario, but this time Calvin smothered Dana and Alia held Dana's hands. Dana fought back a little bit, but the combination of alcohol and sleeping pills really subdued him. Then he just went limp. Finally, Alia thought, now we just need to clean up this mess. Alia had planned to burn down the house with a spiral mosquito repellent, but on its own it wouldn't be enough. So they have attached several matches to keep it burning. They had moved Pupung and Dana's body to the garage and tied them with stove wicks, commonly used for kerosene stove, hoping that the fire would really scorch them. Alia hoped that the combination of the fire and stove wicks might obscure how they died and their identity. Clearly, those dramas that she took inspiration from didn't really teach her about forensics and police investigations in general. 3 mosquito repellents were placed in 3 different areas. 1 in the master bedroom on the first floor, 1 in Dana's room on the second floor, and 1 in the garage. She hoped that the 3 mosquito repellents would burn the whole house in more or less 12 hours. Then the perpetrator started cleaning and making sure everything was in place. When everything was ready, they lit up the match. Then Alia, Calvin, and the 2 hitmen left for Alia's apartment in Kalibata and waited. But what Alia and Calvin didn't know is that Sugeng, one of the hitmen, felt a lot of guilt and remorse. So he decided to put out the mosquito repellents in the master bedroom and in the garage by spitting on it. But he just kept quiet and followed Alia to her apartment. A witness as well as a neighbor by the name of Arif Wahyudi saw that there was smoke coming from Pupung's house. This was around 5 to 6 p.m. the next day, which was on the Saturday, 24th of August. So hours after Alia and her helpers had left. The neighbor then called the fire department and they arrived at 7 p.m. When they arrived, Arif as well as the firefighters had to break down the gates and the front door. By 7:30 p.m., they had successfully put out the fire. Even though it took 4 fire engines to tame the fire, no other area aside Dana's room was burnt. Because Arif had helped the firefighters to enter Pupung's home, he stayed around to help them with whatever they needed. The first thing that he noticed inside the home was the strong smell of gasoline. Another thing that caught his attention was how clean and orderly the place was. Little did he know that a few steps away from him were the deceased bodies of Pupung and Dana, and surprisingly, nobody had found them. The firefighters and some of the neighbors just took a peek inside each of the rooms, making sure that there are no spot fires, and then left. While heading out, Arif felt a chill on his spine. The house was eerily empty and quiet, so very different from the normal vibes that he would feel when he'd occasionally visit. He immediately called Alia again. It was also part of his responsibility as a member of the neighborhood watch to inform her. He had actually tried calling her and Pupung several times when everyone was frantically helping the firefighters, but none of them had answered his calls. However, this time, Alia did answer. Putting on his very best sympathetic voice, he mentioned that her house caught on fire, but thankfully, the firefighters had it under control. He was getting ready to be bombarded with sounds of panic and disbelief followed by frantic questions, as he knew that Alia can be very overly dramatic about little things. Imagine in this case. But in return, he was met with aloofness. It sounded like, and he thought, God forbid, as if she was disappointed. He quickly brushed those thoughts away and told her to come home quickly. And she obliged, sounding a little bit like herself again. But before she could hang up, Arif asked where Pupung was and why he couldn't be contacted. He received the weirdest reply. She said that she doesn't know where he is and hasn't been home for a couple of days. She also had a hard time trying to contact him. This sounded so odd to Arif, but he didn't want to pry into someone else's marriage, so he just let it slide. They probably got into an argument, he thought. They do have explosive arguments from time to time. In the end, he repeated that she had to urgently come home and get things in order. Then he hung up, left with an odd feeling that he couldn't shake off. When Aulia arrived, she was immensely disappointed that her genius plan didn't go so well. She found out that only Dana's room caught on fire. Then she started getting really anxious. People were around the bodies of her husband and her stepson. Her sole mission at that time was to keep people away from the garage, and unfortunately, she managed to do so. When the firefighters left and most of the neighbors went back home, she checked the garage. Nothing had been moved and everything was the same as how she left the house. Suddenly, she was extremely overwhelmed with fatigue. She couldn't handle executing the next part of the plan, so she decided to go back to her apartment. The next day, on Sunday at around dawn, they all went back to the Lebak Bulus house. They needed to get rid of the bodies. Aulia remembered that she had once taken Dana to a pesantren, which is a school focused on Islamic religion located in Parungkuda, Sukabumi. So she planned to stage an accident where the car would fall off a cliff and explode, burning the supposed passengers. And these would-be passengers were Pupung and Dana. They took two cars, the car that belonged to Dana's mom and Calvin's car, and drove to Cidahu, Sukabumi. Pupung and Dana were placed in Dana's car, which Aulia drove, and Calvin would drive his own car. They had chosen a spot where they would ditch the car as well as the bodies. Then they drove about 3 hours from Jakarta to Sukabumi. Before arriving at the spot, they made sure to stop and buy gasoline. They bought 7 gallons of gasoline from a roadside stall, which is pretty common to find in rural areas. Gasoline in hand, they continued driving until they arrived at the spot. Aulia has a habit to show off that she's smart and an educated person, but during this whole debacle, she has shown nothing but the opposite. This includes choosing the most unsuitable area for staging the accident. The area only looked rural on one side, but if you looked at the surrounding hills, the area is filled with houses facing directly to the dump site that they, Aulia and Calvin, had chosen. Well, so much for no witnesses, because everybody in those houses saw the mysterious people frantically pouring some kind of liquid on top of a car, then lit it on fire and hurriedly drove off with the other car. They weren't discreet. They were actually bringing a lot of attention to themselves, which, in hindsight, is a good thing because justice was brought quite swiftly, and we'll get to that soon. So what had happened was, once they had arrived, Aulia parked Dana's car very close to the edge of the cliff. When she was satisfied with the result, she got down and helped Calvin douse the car with gasoline. And as we all know, gasoline burns easily, but it seems that Calvin doesn't know or completely forgot about that fact. As he was standing very close to the car, he whipped out his lighter and lit the car. It was engulfed in flames in a matter of seconds, and before he could pull his hand away from the car, the flames had burnt his arm badly. He didn't realize that while pouring the gasoline, some of it had splashed onto his arm. Aulia saw what was happening. In a very panicked state, they both tried to put out the fire. They succeeded, but they took too long. Calvin was in excruciating pain. Aulia wanted to take Calvin to the nearest hospital, but they were afraid that they might get caught if they stayed too long in Sukabumi. So she decided to drive him back to Jakarta and went straight to Pertamina Hospital in South Jakarta, where Calvin was diagnosed with second-degree burns. It didn't take too long for law enforcement to track Aulia down. Once they found out who the original owner of the car was, everything went downhill for Aulia and her cronies. Aulia was apprehended in Jakarta. From there, she confessed to everything. She even gave Calvin up, who was actually not her nephew. But He is her own son from a previous marriage. Imagine asking your own son to commit an irreparable crime. It was also unclear why she lied about her connection to Calvin to the authorities, because in the end, they easily found out and it did nothing for her or Calvin's defense. It just proves that she's a liar and Calvin a willing participant. So then Calvin was also apprehended at the hospital where he was receiving treatment for his severe burns. At this point, the investigators were still tracking down the two hitmen, but they were already on the run. They went back to Lampung the moment they had the chance. However, they did not receive the 200 million rupiah as was promised. Aulia could only give them 10 million rupiah, so 5 million each. Far from the initial agreement, but she promised them that she will pay them when she receives the money from selling the Lebak Bulus house. A promise that she will never keep and never intended to keep anyway. When this whole incident was picked up by prominent news station in Indonesia, everyone and their grandmother wanted to know the latest update. What the netizens of Indonesia noticed is that Aulia seemed to really enjoy the attention. She spoke incessantly about random facts and would throw a compliment for herself from time to time. She would be so eager in explaining how Pupung was abusive, controlling, and demanding. She even asked the whole nation to stop judging her because, and these are her words, not mine, because when you commit murders, it's only human nature to conceal it.
Dari bulan Juni itu saya sebenarnya udah collab, Mbak, udah nggak bisa. Cuman saya tetap berusaha soalnya saya nggak mau tuh Pak Edi tuh tiap hari marah-marah aja supaya utang saya selalu bilang. Waktu saya kasih tahu aja utangnya segini, dia bilang, kok bisa segitu? Aneh gitu loh, Mbak. Dia seperti tidak sadar gitu loh waktu tanda tangan. Saya nggak ngerti gitu sampai waktu saya bilang ada utang di BRI, kapan ya saya tanda tangan BRI? Itu beneran, Mbak, kata-kata itu bener-bener muncul dari beliau. Kalau ya di Valdres itu memang saya biasa minum sih, Mbak. Kalau saya memang kan orangnya susah tidur sebenarnya. Saya susah tidur memang, apalagi belakangan ini sejak utangnya udah makin nggak bisa saya bayar itu, saya bener-bener udah nggak bisa tidur gitu setiap harinya. Jadi memang saya kadang-kadang suka minum 1, kalau parah banget baru 2 gitu. Ya beli Valdres. Hari itu atau itu kan? Ya manusiawi lah ya, manusiawi ya pastikan kita akan menghilangkan jejak gitu kan, manusiawi lah. Saya rasa ya bukan tolonglah jangan menjudge terus-terusan saya punya niat untuk membakar. Sebenarnya saya cuma berusaha membuat suatu cerita bahwa Pak Edi sama Dana itu akan pergi keluar rumah tapi tidak tahu bahwa mobilnya itu tangkinya bocor gitu. Tangkinya bocor pas lagi mereka akan pergi menyalakan mobil dan Dana itu merokok. Terjadilah ledakan. Tapi itu memang murni saya cuman pengen.
Also, remember the part when she said Dana begged her to marry his dad so that they could have a family and that he might not have a mother figure? Well, that was a complete lie. Dana's mother was very much present during his life and he hated Aulia's guts. Horrible. Just horrible. She wasn't ashamed that she dragged her own son to commit murders, and she clearly wasn't ashamed that she committed the murders. She was just pissed that people were tarnishing her reputation as a caring wife, loving stepmom, and successful businesswoman. Netizens called her the evil stepmom, gold digger, manipulative B-word, murderer, and other adequate names, in my opinion, and she wasn't having none of it. So then she tried to gain sympathy by portraying the battered wife syndrome. But through multiple witness testimonies, it was stated that she was the one who mostly instigated their explosive arguments and would get aggressive if it didn't go her way. She was the one with the manipulative tactics and tried to pull a fast one on the Indonesian netizens, but alas, nobody bought it.
Itu orang yang nggak pernah kerja. Nanti tolong, saya mohon. Orang-orang yang pernah kerja sama saya, tolong bantu saya. Bantu saya untuk jadi saksi bahwa benar Pak Edi selama menikah sama saya tidak pernah bekerja. Yang cari uang itu saya. Awalnya sebenarnya saya nggak ada masalah sama Dana, saya sayang. Cuma sejak dia terkena kasus narkoba sampai 3 kali, dia memang udah mulai berubah. Dan itu saya punya bukti chatnya. Bukti chatnya itu pun pernah saya ancam waktu itu Pak Edi. Saya bilang kalau saya kesel, saya bisa laporin nih ke polisi. Bahwa di situ di bukti chatnya itu bahwa Dana pernah punya niat dia yang membunuh saya. Karena dia udah nggak suka. Maksudnya ya maaf ya, saya tahu saya salah. Saya salah, saya maksudnya bukan ngomong seperti ini, saya bukan mencoba membela diri, tidak, tapi tolonglah gitu, jangan judge saya. Coba sekarang kalian coba menjadi saya satu hari saja, gimana rasanya?
Ibu tidak punya penghasilan.
Enggak, dari awal. Cuma saya orangnya nerimo ya Mbak, bernimo. Memang itu saya ada buktinya juga. Dari awal saya menikah, saya masih kerja di PT BER, saya yang ngajak mereka. Ibarat kata dulu saya hidup juga bahagia, masih bahagia sebelum dananya itu dibeliin mobil, dia bergaulnya nggak bener gitu. Pak Edinya juga udah mulai sikapnya berubah, merasa punya uang banyak. Itu waktu sebenarnya nggak nuntut banyak loh, saya bilang. Selama saya nikah sama Pak Edi, boleh nanti dibuktikan lah sama orang-orang yang pernah ikut. Pernah nggak sekali aja saya itu berfoya-foya, saya beli perhiasan, saya beli baju mahal-mahal, saya pernah beli sepatu mahal-mahal, pernah nggak? Ya dari dulu saya penampilan seperti ini, bukan karena saya sekarang posisinya dari penjara, saya penampilan, memang saya nggak pernah seperti wanita lain layaknya punya uang banyak itu, enggak, memang seperti ini dari dulu, dan itu saya siap untuk dibuktikan.
Atas curhat.
Bantu, ya saya mohonlah pembantu-pembantu saya itu suster saya yang pernah ikut lama, saya mohon melalui media ini, saya mohon bantu saya sebagai saksi bagaimana perlakuan Pak Edi terhadap saya, bagaimana kelakuannya Pak Edi itu di rumah. Yang saya bicara seperti ini bukan saya tidak menyesali apa yang saya kerjakan, yang saya lakukan, saya menyesal, saya minta maaf kepada keluarganya Pak Edi.
Kemudian dari ketika Ibu bisa
Kasih kesempatan, saya minta maaf sama semua, terutama sama keluarganya Pak Edi. Seperti tadi saya juga sudah sampaikan. Ya, saya cuma minta tolonglah ampunin saya juga menyesal kok.
Even during the crime scene reenactment, she kept micromanaging the investigators and the actors, scolding them for the most menial things. Of course, the investigators already knew the whole picture. Remember, she had confessed, so they just let her mouth run.
Jangan bilang kayak gitu, saya juga bisa marah. Kamu begini loh, Gang.
Gitu.
Pegangin kaki begini. Coba buka deh, Gang. Nggak kayak gitu, Gang. Kamu ada di sini.
They had asked her to do the reenactment for the sole purpose of building more rapport, not just about her, but also her son, who was still at the hospital, and the two hitmen, and boy, did they get more than the whole picture. Aaliyah, even in handcuffs, really thought that she could still get away by yapping through it all, as if pointing out inconsequential details of how the crime took place would lessen the fact that she premeditated crimes, hired hitmen, and carried out not one but two murders. But in the end, she finally learned to shut up when the judge sentenced her with the death penalty. And Kelvin, her son, also received the death penalty. What about Rodi, Tini, and the two hitmen? Well, Rodi skedaddled back to Jakarta before everything went down. When he arrived in Lampung, he took Tini, his wife, into hiding in a remote area of the Sumatra island. The two hitmen, Sugeng and Agus, did the same thing. It took some time for law enforcement to apprehend them. Sumatra is a big island with plenty of super remote areas, but they were eventually caught and brought back to Jakarta to be tried. The investigations were swift, as they confessed and admitted to everything. So in the end, Sugeng and Agus were given life sentences. Rodi, the shaman finder, received 14 years of incarceration, and Tini, his wife, received 10 years. Pupung and Dana were buried a week after they were found. They were buried together in the same grave, a decision that Henny, Dana's mom, as well as Pupung's ex-wife, took with their extended family as a way so that the father and son can rest peacefully together. And that is the drama-inspired murders committed by Aaliyah Kusuma and her son Kelvin. It is genuinely tiring listening to her yap on and on without substance. Thank God we don't have to listen to her anymore. Well, thank you so much for watching. Do please hit the like button and comment your thoughts. They do really help me out a lot. And if you haven't, subscribe for more videos like this. Have a wonderful day and night wherever you are, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.
I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear.